One of the biggest questions in all of human evolution is deceptively simple. When did modern humans actually appear on this planet? It seems like something science should have answered long ago. For decades, researchers believed the answer was clear and uncomplicated. Modern humans evolved somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 years ago in Africa. That was the story. It was taught in universities. It appeared in textbooks. It was repeated in documentaries and museum exhibits around the world. The timeline felt settled, almost beyond question. But new discoveries are beginning to challenge that once confident narrative. Quietly at first, then with growing force, the evidence has started to shift. Mysterious ancient human fossils have emerged from unexpected places. Genomes extracted from tiny fragments of bone have revealed species no one knew existed. The human family tree, it turns out, is far more tangled than anyone previously believed. It is not a neat line from ancient ancestor to modern human. Researchers studying Denisovans, Neanderthals, and newly discovered fossils from Asia have found something remarkable. The lineage leading to modern humans may be much older than expected. Some reconstructions of the human evolutionary tree now suggest that the divergence leading to our species may reach back close to 1 million years ago. If that interpretation is correct, it changes everything. The origin of our species would not be a recent event, but part of a much deeper story. A story stretching across vast spans of time. A story involving multiple human species living side by side, interbreeding, competing, and vanishing. So, if modern humans are far older than we thought, then where did our lineage actually begin? And why does the fossil record tell such a confusing story? Tonight we are going to explore that mystery together. We will travel across continents, deep into caves, and through millions of years of evolutionary history. Let us begin with the story as it was once told. The simple version. The version that felt so certain for so long before the ground beneath it started to shift. For most of the 20th century, the study of human origins followed a reassuring pattern. Scientists would find fossils, date them, and place them along a timeline. That timeline pointed consistently to Africa. The oldest fossils of anatomically modern humans were found there. The genetic evidence also pointed to an African origin. The theory became known as the out-of-Africa model. It proposed that modern humans evolved in Africa and then migrated outward to populate the rest of the world. According to this model, a single population of Homo sapiens left Africa roughly 60,000 to 70,000 years ago. They spread into Asia, Europe, Australia, and eventually the Americas. Along the way, they encountered other human species, Neanderthals in Europe, Homo erectus in Asia, but these other species eventually disappeared, replaced by the newcomers. The narrative was clean. One species arose. One species migrated. One species survived. Everyone alive today descended from that same African population. Supporting this idea were fossils from sites like Omo Kibish in Ethiopia. Skulls dated to roughly 195,000 years ago looked remarkably like modern humans. Later discoveries at Jebel Irhoud in Morocco pushed the date back further to around 300,000 years ago. But even this adjustment did not fundamentally alter the framework. It simply meant modern humans were a little older than expected. The basic story remained the same. Africa was the cradle. Homo sapiens was the single surviving lineage. Genetics seemed to confirm this picture beautifully. Studies of mitochondrial DNA traced all living humans back to a common maternal ancestor in Africa. She was nicknamed Mitochondrial Eve. She lived roughly 200,000 years ago. Her existence seemed to seal the case for a recent African origin. Similarly, Y chromosome studies pointed to a common paternal ancestor who also lived in Africa around the same general time period. The convergence of fossil evidence and genetic evidence was compelling. Two independent lines of inquiry pointed to the same conclusion. Modern humans were young and African in origin. This was the story taught to generations of students. It was elegant, evidence-based, and satisfying in its simplicity. But simplicity can be deceptive. Science rarely stays still for long. New technologies emerged, new excavation methods were developed, and researchers began looking in places that had previously been overlooked or dismissed. What they found would begin to unravel the neat narrative thread by thread, not destroying it entirely, but complicating it in ways no one anticipated. The first hints came from genetics. When scientists learned to extract ancient DNA from fossils, they discovered something startling hidden in the human genome. Modern humans carried traces of DNA from other species. Not just small traces, meaningful percentages. Evidence of interbreeding that the simple out-of-Africa model had not predicted. Then came fossil discoveries that refused to fit the timeline. Bones that looked modern but were far too old. Bones found in places that made no sense. The human story was about to get much more complicated and much more interesting. The simple version was not wrong exactly, but it was incomplete. What lay ahead was a series of revelations that would reshape our understanding of who we are, where we came from, and how long our lineage truly stretches back. The journey into that deeper story begins now. Chapter 2. The human family tree gets complicated. The neat timeline that defined human origins for decades began to fray in the early 2000s. It did not collapse all at once. Instead, it unraveled slowly, discovery by discovery. The first major shock came from an unexpected direction. It came not from fossils buried in sediment, but from molecules extracted from ancient bone. In 2010, a team led by Svante Pääbo at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology published a landmark paper. They had sequenced the Neanderthal genome. The results were stunning. Modern humans of European and Asian descent carried between 1% and 4% Neanderthal DNA. This was not supposed to happen. Under the classic out-of-Africa model, modern humans replaced other species without significant interbreeding. The genome told a different story entirely. Somewhere in the ancient past, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals had met, mated, and produced offspring who survived. Those hybrid children carried their mixed heritage forward through generations. This was not contamination. It was not an error. Multiple independent studies confirmed the finding. Neanderthal DNA was woven into the fabric of modern human genomes. You carry some of it right now. If your ancestry traces to anywhere outside sub-Saharan Africa, fragments of Neanderthal code still function inside your cells today. Some of those fragments influence your immune system. Others affect your skin and hair. Some may even play a role in how you sleep. The implications were enormous. Homo sapiens had not simply replaced other human species. Our ancestors had lived alongside them, interacted with them, and blended with them genetically. But the Neanderthal revelation was only the beginning. More surprises were coming. The human family tree was about to gain entirely new branches. Around the same time, researchers began re-examining fossils that had been discovered decades earlier but never fully understood. Many of these came from Asia. For years, Asia had been something of a blind spot in human evolution studies. Africa and Europe received most of the attention and most of the funding. But Asia is vast. It stretches from the frozen plains of Siberia to the tropical islands of Southeast Asia. Humans and their relatives had lived there for millennia. Homo erectus, one of the most successful human species ever, had thrived across Asia for nearly 2 million years. Their fossils are found from China to Indonesia. Yet the story of what happened in Asia between the time of Homo erectus and the arrival of modern humans remained murky and poorly understood. New discoveries began to fill in those gaps. And what they revealed was a landscape populated by multiple human species existing simultaneously across different regions. On the Indonesian island of Flores, researchers discovered Homo floresiensis in 2003. This tiny human species stood only about 3.5 feet tall. They used stone tools. They hunted small elephants. And they survived on flores until perhaps 50,000 years ago, long after modern humans had spread across the globe. The discovery was sensational. A previously unknown human species living in isolation on a remote island, surviving far longer than anyone thought possible. But Flores was not the only surprise. In the Philippines, another small-bodied human species was identified. Homo luzonensis was announced in 2019 based on fossils from Callao Cave. These fossils dated to at least 67,000 years ago. Like Homo floresiensis, this species displayed a puzzling mix of ancient and modern features. The picture emerging from Southeast Asia was extraordinary. Multiple human species had coexisted across island chains and mainland territories for tens of thousands of years. Meanwhile, in Africa, the story was becoming equally complex. New fossil discoveries suggested that the evolution of Homo sapiens was not a straightforward linear process. Fossils from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, dated to around 300,000 years ago, showed faces that looked modern but brain cases that still appeared somewhat archaic. This suggested that modern human features did not all evolve at once. Instead, they appeared gradually in a mosaic pattern across different populations spread across Africa. Some researchers proposed a model called African multi-regionalism. Rather than evolving in one location, Homo sapiens may have emerged from interconnected populations scattered across the continent. These populations would have been partially isolated by deserts, forests, and mountains. But occasionally, they reconnected, sharing genes and gradually assembling the full suite of modern traits. This was a radical departure from the idea of a single point of origin. It suggested that the birth of our species was a continental process. And the complications did not end there. Genetic studies revealed traces of interbreeding with archaic African populations whose fossils have never been identified. Ghost populations, researchers called them. Their physical remains have not been found, but their genetic signatures linger in the DNA of some modern African groups. These ghost lineages may have diverged from the ancestors of modern humans hundreds of thousands of years ago. Yet they contributed DNA to populations living today. The human family tree was no longer a tree at all. It was becoming a braided stream, with channels splitting apart, emerging back together over vast stretches of time. Each new discovery added another layer of complexity. Each new genome revealed another episode of mixing between species that were supposed to have remained separate. You might wonder why this matters. Why should the complexity of our ancient past change anything about how we understand ourselves today? The answer is that it changes the very definition of what it means to be human. If our species emerged not from one place, but from many interacting groups, our identity is collective. We are not the product of a single lucky mutation or one brilliant population. We are a mosaic, assembled over hundreds of thousands of years from diverse sources. That realization is both humbling and profound. It means the boundaries between human species were never as firm as we imagined. Life was messier and more interconnected. And the most dramatic illustration of this new understanding was about to emerge from one of the most unlikely places on Earth, a cave in Siberia. Deep in the Altai Mountains of southern Russia, a small limestone cavern held a secret that would rewrite the story of human evolution once again. The discovery waiting inside that cave would introduce the world to a completely unknown branch of the human family, a species that left almost no fossils behind. But their genetic legacy would prove to be enormous, and their story would push the timeline of human divergence far deeper into the past than anyone expected. That discovery begins with something impossibly small, a fragment of bone no larger than a fingertip, found in the dirt of a Siberian cave floor. Chapter 3. The discovery of the Denisovans, the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia, are a place of immense quiet. Snow covers the peaks for much of the year. Rivers carved through valleys carpeted with birch and pine. It is a landscape that feels timeless, the kind of place where the modern world fades and something much older seems to press close to the surface. Nestled into the limestone cliffs above the Anai River sits a cave. It is called Denisova Cave, named after a hermit who reportedly lived there in the 18th century. The cave is not large. Its entrance opens modestly into a main chamber with branching galleries extending deeper into the rock. Sediment layers coat the floor meters deep. Archaeologists had been excavating Denisova Cave since the 1970s. They found stone tools, animal bones, and evidence that ancient humans had used the cave for thousands of years. Neanderthal fossils were eventually recovered there. This was not surprising. Neanderthals were known to have lived across a wide swath of Europe and Western Asia. But in 2008, Russian archaeologists working in the cave's East Gallery unearthed something extraordinary. It was a tiny bone fragment, barely visible amid the surrounding sediment. The fragment came from the tip of a finger, a child's finger, based on its size. It was recovered from a layer dated to approximately 40,000 years ago. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about it. It was too small and too fragmentary to reveal much through traditional anatomical analysis alone. The bone was sent to the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany. There, Svani Piobo and his team specialized in extracting ancient DNA. The cold conditions of the Siberian cave have preserved the bone beautifully at the molecular level. DNA survival depends heavily on temperature, and Denisova Cave was ideal. When the team extracted and sequenced the mitochondrial DNA from the bone, the results were immediately puzzling. The sequence did not match modern humans. That alone was not shocking. Ancient bones sometimes yield Neanderthal DNA, but this sequence did not match Neanderthals either. It was something entirely different. The mitochondrial DNA diverged from both modern humans and Neanderthals by roughly 1 million years. This suggested a lineage that had separated from our common ancestor far earlier. The scientific community was stunned. A single bone fragment, smaller than a coin, had revealed the existence of a previously unknown group of ancient humans. They were named the Denisovans after the cave where the bone was found. No complete skeleton existed. No skull. No reconstruction of what they looked like. Almost everything known about the Denisovans came from their DNA. They were a genetic ghost made real, defined not by their anatomy but by their molecules. Further analysis of the nuclear genome confirmed the initial finding. The Denisovans represented a distinct population that had diverged from Neanderthals roughly 400,000 years ago. But the deeper divergence between the Denisovan Neanderthal lineage and the lineage leading to modern humans reached much further back, potentially approaching 1 million years. This was a staggering number. It meant the evolutionary paths that eventually produced modern humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans had begun separating in the depths of the early Pleistocene. More Denisovan material was eventually found in the cave. A molar tooth, massive, and unlike anything seen in Neanderthals or modern humans, was recovered. A second molar followed. Both teeth were enormous and morphologically distinct. They hinted at a robust, powerful jaw structure, unlike any known human species. Then came another remarkable find. A fragment of long bone from Denisova Cave yielded DNA showing that its owner had a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. This individual, nicknamed Denny by the press, was a first-generation hybrid. Direct proof that Denisovans and Neanderthals had not only met but produced children together. The discovery of Denny demonstrated that interbreeding between human species was not a rare accident. It was a recurring feature of our evolutionary history. But perhaps the most astonishing aspect of the Denisovan discovery was what their DNA revealed about modern humans alive today. The genetic legacy was not confined to the past. People of Melanesian ancestry, including those in Papua New Guinea and Aboriginal Australians, carry up to 5 or 6% Denisovan DNA. This is a substantial amount. It means that when modern humans migrated into Southeast Asia and the Pacific, they encountered Denisovans and interbred with them in significant numbers. Some of the Denisovan DNA that survives in modern populations appears to serve important functions. Certain variants help with immune response and adaptation to high altitudes. Tibetan populations carry a Denisovan gene variant called EPAS, one that helps the body function efficiently at high elevations with low oxygen. It is sometimes called the superathlete gene. This gene was inherited from Denisovan ancestors. It gave Tibetans a biological advantage that helped them thrive on the highest plateau on Earth. The Denisovan story appended assumptions about human evolution. Here was a species known almost entirely from molecules, yet their influence on living humans was undeniable. They raised uncomfortable questions for the old linear model. How many other unknown species contributed to the modern human genome? What else is hidden in our DNA? Subsequent genetic studies found traces of additional archaic interbreeding events. Some modern Asian populations show evidence of at least 2 separate Denisovan admixture events from different populations. This suggested that Denisovans were not a single uniform group. They may have been spread across a vast range with genetically distinct populations in different regions. The geographic extent of the Denisovans remains poorly understood. Fossils are scarce, but their genetic signature in modern populations stretches from Tibet to Southeast Asia to Oceania. Some researchers believe Denisovans once occupied an enormous territory across Asia. They may have been one of the most widespread and successful human species ever. Yet almost nothing of their physical presence survives. A finger bone, a few teeth, a jaw fragment found in a cave on the Tibetan plateau. That jaw, discovered in Baixia Karst Cave in Xia, China, was identified as Denisovan through protein analysis. It was dated to at least 160,000 years ago. It confirmed that Denisovans lived at extremely high altitudes long before modern humans arrived. They were adapted to environments that would challenge even people living there today. The Denisovan discovery forced a fundamental rethinking of human evolution. The family tree was not a tree. It was a network of interconnected lineages exchanging genes. And the timeline of that network stretched far deeper than anyone had imagined just a decade earlier. The roots of our species reached into truly ancient ground. But Siberia was not the only place hiding secrets. Across the border in China, another discovery had been waiting in silence for nearly 80 years. A skull of extraordinary size and preservation had been hidden from the world. Its story involves war, secrecy, and a deathbed confession that would change everything. Chapter 4. A skull hidden for 80 years in 1933. A Chinese laborer was working on a bridge construction project near the city of Harbin in northeastern China. The region was under Japanese occupation at the time. The bridge spanned the Songhua River. Workers digging foundations for its massive pillars had to excavate deep into the riverbed sediments that had accumulated over millennia. During this work, the laborer uncovered something extraordinary. Embedded in the sediment was a nearly complete human skull of enormous proportions. It was unlike anything he had seen. The skull was massive. Its brain case was large enough to hold a brain comparable in size to our own. But its features were a bewildering combination of old and new. The brow ridges were thick and prominent, reminiscent of more archaic human species. The eye sockets were nearly square. The nose was broad, and the face was flat. Yet beneath those heavy brow ridges, the face was surprisingly delicate in some respects. The cheekbones were low and flat. The overall proportions suggested something close to modern. The laborer recognized that the skull was significant, but he also recognized the danger of his situation. The Japanese military controlled the region with an iron grip. Handing the skull to Japanese authorities might mean it would disappear forever, taken to Japan as a trophy or curiosity. The laborer made a fateful decision. He wrapped the skull carefully and brought it home. There, he lowered it into his family's well, hiding it beneath the water where no one would think to look. And there the skull remained, through the rest of the Japanese occupation, through the end of World War II, through the Chinese Civil War and the Communist Revolution. Decades passed. The laborer grew old. The world above changed beyond recognition. But deep in that well, preserved by the cool water, the skull waited in darkness. The man never told the authorities about his discovery. He kept the secret for most of his life, sharing it only with his closest family members. It was not until 2018, when the man lay on his deathbed, that he finally revealed the skull's location to his family. He told them where to look. His family retrieved the skull from the well. After nearly 80 years submerged in water, it was remarkably well preserved. The cool temperature had protected it. The family donated the skull to the Geoscience Museum at Hebei Geo University. Scientists immediately recognized that they were looking at something profoundly important. The skull was given to a research team led by Professor Kang Ji. Detailed analysis began, involving researchers from China, the United Kingdom, and Australia. Initial examinations confirmed what the first glance suggested. This skull did not fit neatly into any known category of human species. It was something different. The team named it Homo longi, derived from the Chinese word for dragon. The Songhua River, where the skull was found, is sometimes called Dragon River. In English-language media, the species quickly gained a more evocative nickname, Dragon Man. The name captured public imagination, even as scientists debated its proper classification. Dating the skull proved challenging, because it had been removed from its original geological context decades earlier. Standard stratigraphic dating methods could not be applied directly. Instead, researchers used a combination of techniques. They analyzed uranium series dating and strontium isotope ratios from the skull itself and from sediments clinging to it. These analyses suggested the skull was at least 146,000 years old. Some estimates placed it even older, perhaps dating to the Middle Pleistocene around 300,000 years ago. The age range meant this individual lived during a period when multiple human species coexisted across Eurasia. Neanderthals in the west, Denisovans possibly in the east, and now, potentially, Dragon Man in northeastern Asia. The crowded landscape of ancient humanity had gained yet another inhabitant. But what exactly was Dragon Man? This question ignited fierce debate among paleoanthropologists. Different researchers reached strikingly different conclusions about where this skull belonged. The original research team conducted phylogenetic analysis, comparing the Harbin skull to dozens of other fossil human skulls from around the world using hundreds of anatomical measurements. Their analysis produced a surprising result. The Harbin skull appeared to be more closely related to modern Homo sapiens than Neanderthals were. If correct, this would mean Dragon Man was our closest known evolutionary relative, closer to us than the Neanderthals who have long held that title. The team proposed that Homo longi and Homo sapiens shared a common ancestor, and that the two lineages diverged more recently than the split with Neanderthals. This interpretation was extraordinary. It suggested a previously unknown sister-lineage to modern humans had existed in East Asia during the Middle and Late Pleistocene. Not everyone agreed. Several prominent researchers argued that the Harbin skull might actually belong to the Denisovans. The geographic location and time period seemed to fit, since Denisovans are known primarily from DNA rather than fossils. Putting a face on them has been one of the great challenges of paleoanthropology. The Harbin skull, with its massive size and archaic yet oddly modern features, seemed like a plausible candidate for what a Denisovan might have looked like. If the Harbin skull is indeed Denisovan, then Dragon Man and Denisovan would be the same species known by two different names from two different types of evidence. This possibility remains unresolved. No DNA has yet been successfully extracted from the Harbin skull. The decades spent submerged in well water likely degraded genetic material. Without DNA, the connection between Dragon Man and the Denisovans remains circumstantial, compelling to some researchers, unconvincing to others. The debate continues in scientific journals. Regardless of its exact classification, the Harbin skull carries profound implications. Its combination of archaic and modern features challenges simple definitions of what makes a human modern. The skull suggests that during the Middle Pleistocene, multiple lineages with large brains and sophisticated anatomies existed simultaneously across different parts of the world. Some of these lineages may have contributed to the ancestry of people alive today. Others may have disappeared without leaving genetic descendants. The picture remains incomplete. The Harbin discovery also raises questions about the fossil record itself. If a skull this important could remain hidden in a well for 80 years, what else might be missing? China's fossil record for human evolution has long been underappreciated in Western scientific circles. Discoveries like Dragon Man are beginning to correct that imbalance. But the Harbin skull is not alone. Other Chinese fossils from sites like Dali, Jinyushan, and Hualongdang display similarly puzzling mixes of archaic and modern characteristics. Together, these fossils suggest that East Asia was a crucible of human evolution, a place where multiple lineages evolved, interacted, and possibly contributed to the modern human gene pool. The story of Dragon Man also reminds us how much of human evolutionary history depends on chance. The chance of preservation, the chance of discovery, the chance of survival. One laborer's decision to hide a skull in a well during wartime ultimately delivered a discovery that may reshape our understanding of human origins. And there is something almost poetic about that. The most important clues to our deepest past sometimes survive not through careful scientific excavation, but through human acts of quiet preservation. The Harbin skull has opened the door into a period of human history that remains poorly understood. The Middle Pleistocene, from roughly 800,000 to 120,000 years ago. This vast stretch of time witnessed some of the most important events in human evolution. The divergence of major lineages, the development of sophisticated tool technologies, the mastery of fire. Yet the fossil record for this period remains frustratingly sparse. Vast regions of Asia, Africa, and even parts of Europe have yielded few hominin fossils from this time. What happened during those hundreds of thousands of years? How many human species lived and died without leaving a trace that we have found? The answers may be hiding in places we have not yet looked, in caves not yet explored, in sediments not yet dated, in collections not yet re-examined. And some answers may be hiding in the most unexpected place of all. Not in bones or caves or ancient sediment layers, but inside the DNA of people alive right now. The human genome carries echoes of encounters that happened hundreds of thousands of years ago. Ghost lineages, archaic introgressions, fragments of code from species we have never named. These molecular fossils may ultimately tell us more about the deep history of our species than any physical fossil ever could. The evidence is already inside us. But reading that evidence requires new tools, new methods, and a willingness to abandon old assumptions about when and where modern humans truly began. The next chapter of this story takes us even deeper into the past, beyond Dragon Man, beyond the Denisovans, into a time when the ancestors of all these lineages still walked together. What we find there will challenge everything you thought you knew about the age of our species and the meaning of being human. Chapter 5. Dragon Man and the Denisovan Face. The Harbin skull sat in its glass case. Scientists from around the world studied its photographs. They debated its meaning in journals and conferences, but one question kept returning. One question that nobody could fully answer. Was Dragon Man actually a Denisovan? The problem was straightforward. Denisovans were discovered through DNA, a finger bone, a few teeth, a fragment of jaw from a Tibetan cave. Nobody knew what a full Denisovan face looked like. The genetics were clear. The anatomy was almost entirely missing. Then came the Harbin skull, massive, broad, with a brain case rivaling modern humans in volume. Its face was wide and flat. Its brow ridges were prominent, but shaped differently from Neanderthals. It looked like nothing else in the fossil record. Professor Chris Stringer of the Natural History Museum in London was among the first to raise the connection publicly. He had co-authored the original Dragon Man paper. He knew the skull's measurements intimately, and he suspected it might belong to the Denisovans. His reasoning was careful. The Harbin skull came from northeastern China. Denisovan DNA was found across East Asia and into Oceania. The timeline fit. The geography fit. The skull's unusual combination of features matched no known species perfectly. It occupied exactly the space Denisovans should fill. But there was resistance. The original Chinese team had named the skull Homo longi. They had placed it as a separate species, closer to Homo sapiens than Neanderthals were. Assigning it to the Denisovans would collapse that new classification entirely. Other researchers pointed to the Xia jaw. That mandible from Bashia Kar's cave in Tibet was confirmed Denisovan through protein analysis. Its shape was robust. Its molars were enormous. Could its proportions match a skull like Harbin? Virtual reconstructions were attempted. Researchers used the jawbone's dimensions to estimate what the rest of the face might have looked like. The results were tantalizing. The predicted face was broad. The cheekbones were wide. The overall architecture was strikingly compatible with what the Harbin skull displayed. Ben Sviola at the University of Toronto had studied the original Denisovan teeth from Siberia. Those teeth were unusually large. The Harbin skull's dental dimensions were also large, another thread connecting the two. Another line of circumstantial evidence building toward the same conclusion. Still, the definitive proof remained elusive. No DNA had been successfully extracted from the Harbin skull. The fossil had spent decades in a well. Water exposure may have degraded any surviving genetic material beyond recovery. Without DNA, the connection could not be confirmed. This was the central frustration. Denisovans were a genetic ghost given substance by molecules alone. The Harbin skull was an anatomical marvel with no molecular identity. They were two halves of the same puzzle separated by the limitations of preservation. Some geneticists had tried a different approach. They looked at populations carrying the highest Denisovan ancestry. Melanesians, Aboriginal Australians, certain Filipino groups. They asked what physical traits those Denisovan gene variants influenced in living people. The results were subtle but suggestive. Some Denisovan gene variants affected skull width. Others influenced jaw robustness. A few were linked to dental size. The pattern pointed toward a large-faced, powerfully built individual. Someone who might look remarkably like Dragon Man. Meanwhile, another line of evidence emerged from sediment DNA. Researchers had begun extracting ancient genetic material directly from cave dirt. Denisova Cave itself yielded layers of sediment containing Denisovan DNA spanning hundreds of thousands of years. Could similar techniques work at sites near Harbin? Could the riverbed sediments where the skull was allegedly found contain traces of ancient DNA? The problem was provenance. The skull's exact find spot was never formally recorded. The laborer's family provided only approximate information. This uncertainty haunted every analysis. Without precise stratigraphic context, some researchers questioned whether the skull's dating was reliable. Others argued the uranium series dating of the matrix adhering to the skull was robust regardless of the exact location. The debate revealed something deeper about paleoanthropology itself. The field depended on context. A fossil without a documented excavation was like a book without a title page. Valuable but forever incomplete. The Harbin skull carried this burden. Yet the circumstantial case kept growing. In 2023, additional computational analyses compared the Harbin skull to every known hominin cranium in the database. It consistently clustered away from Homo sapiens, away from Neanderthals, away from Homo erectus. It occupied its own morphological space. That space was exactly where Denisovans were predicted to sit. Not quite modern, not quite Neanderthal. Something parallel. Something that evolved along its own trajectory across East Asia for hundreds of thousands of years while Neanderthals dominated Europe and Western Asia. If the connection holds, then Dragon Man gives us the Denisovan face at last. A face that is hauntingly human. A face with deep-set eyes beneath heavy brows. A face that carried intelligence and adaptation through ice ages and interglacial warmth across an enormous continent. Imagine seeing that face across a river valley 200,000 years ago. You would recognize something. Not quite yourself, but close. Close enough to interbreed. Close enough to share fire and tools and perhaps language. Close enough to leave traces in your descendants forever. The confirmation may still come. New techniques for ancient protein analysis are advancing rapidly. The skull may yet yield Denisovan proteins, even if DNA is gone. And if it does, the ghost will finally have a face. But even without final proof, the implications were already reshaping the field. The Harbin skull demonstrated that East Asia harbored human diversity far beyond what anyone had imagined. And it raised a question that would drive the next chapter of discovery even deeper. How far back did these lineages actually go? The Denisovan genetic divergence pointed towards something very old. Older than 300,000 years. Older than 500,000. The molecular evidence was pointing toward 1,000,000 years. And remarkably, the fossils were beginning to agree. Something extraordinary was waiting in the Chinese fossil record. Something that would push the entire story backward through time on a scale that challenged everything. Chapter 6. The 1,000,000-year-old fossil. The skull was not found in one piece. It was found in fragments, hundreds of them, scattered through ancient sediments at a site in central China. Reassembling it would take years of painstaking work. But when the reconstruction was complete, the result was staggering. The site was Yongxin in Hubei province. 2 crania had been discovered there in 1989 and 1990. They were designated Yongxin 1 and Yongxin 2. Both were badly crushed by geological pressure over immense spans of time. Both were extraordinarily old. Dating placed the Yongxin skulls at approximately 1,000,000 years old. Some estimates push slightly younger. Others suggested they could be even older. But the general consensus placed them firmly in the early Pleistocene, a time most researchers associated with Homo erectus alone. The original fossils were difficult to interpret because of their distortion. Imagine a skull compressed from one side like a crumpled aluminum can. The anatomical landmarks were displaced. Measurements were unreliable. For decades, the Yongxin crania remained puzzling curiosities at the margins of paleoanthropology. Then, digital technology changed everything. Researchers at the French National Center for Scientific Research began a virtual reconstruction project. They used computed tomography scanning to create 3-dimensional digital models of every fragment. Then they digitally reversed the geological deformation. The lead researcher was Aurélien Mounier. Working with colleagues in France and China, he applied geometric morphometric techniques to unwarp the crushed bones. Piece by piece, the original shape of the skull emerged from the distortion, like a face surfacing through clouded water. What they found was not what anyone expected. The reconstructed Yongxin 2 skull did not look like a typical Homo erectus. Its brain case was larger. Its face was flatter. Its overall morphology occupied a position between Homo erectus and later humans. It looked transitional. More specifically, it displayed features that would later appear in both Neanderthals and modern humans. as if this million-year-old individual belonged to a population that had not yet diverged into those separate lineages, a common ancestor, or something very close to one. This was a radical implication. The standard timeline placed the divergence between the Neanderthal lineage and the modern human lineage at roughly 500 to 700,000 years ago. The Jungian skull suggested the process may have started earlier, perhaps much earlier. The reconstruction was published and immediately generated intense discussion. Some researchers accepted the findings cautiously. Others questioned whether digital dwarfing could reliably recover original skull shape from such severe distortion. The methodology was sound in principle, but unprecedented in application at this scale. Supporting evidence came from other Chinese sites. The Dali skull from Shanxi province, dated to roughly 270,000 years ago, showed a similar mosaic of features. So did fossils from Jinyishan and Maba. A pattern was emerging across Chinese paleoanthropology. That pattern suggested continuous human presence in East Asia stretching back over 1 million years. Not a simple replacement by modern humans arriving from Africa, something more complex. Multiple populations evolving in parallel, exchanging genes periodically, diverging and reconverging across vast timescales. The Jungian reconstruction also resonated with the Harman skull. If Dragon Man represented a late surviving member of an ancient East Asian lineage, then Jungian might represent an early member of that same lineage. A million-year thread connecting them through deep time. Other fossils strengthened this connection. The Hualongdong fossils from Anhui province, dated to roughly 300,000 years ago, showed a chin resembling modern humans combined with a skull base resembling archaic forms. Again the mosaic pattern. Again the blurring of neat categories. Researchers began speaking of a Middle Pleistocene muddle. The period between roughly 800,000 and 120,000 years ago was yielding fossils that refused to fit into clean species boxes. Every new discovery made the picture more complex, not simpler. The Jungian reconstruction added fuel to another debate. Were there more human species in the Middle Pleistocene than currently recognized? Or fewer? Perhaps the apparent diversity reflected a single widespread variable species rather than multiple distinct ones. Some researchers proposed that Homo heidelbergensis should serve as an umbrella category for all Middle Pleistocene humans outside of Homo erectus. Others argued that Homo heidelbergensis itself was poorly defined and should be abandoned as a taxon entirely. The stakes were not merely academic. How scientists classified these fossils determined how they understood the branching pattern of human evolution. Get the classification wrong, and the entire family tree was distorted. The Jungian skull sat right at the critical junction. Meanwhile, independent evidence was converging from an unexpected direction. Geneticists working with ancient and modern DNA were recalculating the molecular clock. Their new estimates for when human lineages diverged were pushing backward through time, toward the same million-year horizon the Jungian fossils occupied. The fossils and the genes were beginning to tell the same story, a story far older and more complicated than anyone had proposed even a decade earlier. The roots of modern humanity might extend not 200,000 years into the past, but closer to 1 million. This was not a minor revision. This was a fundamental reimagining of human origins, and the genetic evidence that would support it was about to arrive with devastating precision. The molecular clock was being reset, and when the new numbers emerged, they would change the timeline permanently. Chapter 7. When the genetic clock was recalculated. The molecular clock is one of the most powerful tools in evolutionary biology. It works on a simple principle. DNA accumulates mutations at a roughly constant rate over time. By counting the differences between two species, you can estimate when their lineages diverged. For decades, the molecular clock placed the split between modern humans and Neanderthals at roughly 400 to 500,000 years ago. This fit comfortably with the fossil record. Neanderthal-like features appeared in European fossils around that time. The genetics and anatomy agreed, but the clock depended on calibration. Researchers needed an anchor point, a known divergence with a known date. For years, they used the split between humans and orangutans calibrated by fossils, dated to roughly 12 to 16 million years ago. Change the anchor point, and all the downstream dates shift. Change the assumed mutation rate, and every estimate moves. The molecular clock was precise, but only as accurate as its underlying assumptions. And those assumptions were about to be challenged. The first challenge came from direct measurement. Researchers began sequencing the genomes of parents and their children. By comparing them directly, they could count how many new mutations appeared in a single generation. This gave an observed mutation rate rather than an inferred one. The observed rate was slower than expected, significantly slower. Previous estimates suggested roughly 1 mutation per billion base pairs per year. The directly measured rate was closer to half that. A slower clock meant deeper divergence times. Everything was older than previously calculated. This discovery sent shockwaves through the field. If the mutation rate was half the previous estimate, then the Neanderthal-modern human split was not 400,000 years ago. It was closer to 800,000 years ago, perhaps even earlier. The Denisovan divergence pushed back even further. Original estimates placed it at roughly 1 million years based on mitochondrial DNA alone. With the recalculated clock, the nuclear genome suggested divergence times approaching 1 million years or more for the broader lineage. Suddenly, the Yongtian fossils made perfect sense. A skull dated to 1 million years ago showing features ancestral to both Neanderthals and modern humans was exactly what you would expect if the divergence happened around that time. The fossils and genetics were converging on the same answer. But the implications went further. If major human lineages began separating close to 1 million years ago, then the roots of our own species extended far deeper than 300,000 years. The features that define us did not appear suddenly. They accumulated gradually across hundreds of thousands of years. This was the concept of deep human ancestry. Modern humanity was not born in a single moment at a single location. It emerged slowly across a vast interconnected population spread over much of Africa and possibly beyond. Different features appeared at different times in different places. The Jebel Irhoud fossils illustrated this perfectly. 300,000 years ago, these individuals had modern faces but archaic brain cases. The Homo Kibish skulls from 195,000 years ago were more fully modern. The transition was gradual, not instantaneous. Genetic studies of living African populations supported the same conclusion. Different groups carried ancient lineage segments that diverged from each other at remarkably deep times. Some divergences between modern African populations dated to over 300,000 years ago. The implication was extraordinary. The genetic diversity within our own species was far older than the species itself as traditionally defined. We carried within us the echoes of lineages that began separating long before the first anatomically modern skull appeared in the fossil record. Ghost lineages add in another dimension. Statistical analysis of modern African genomes detected contributions from unknown archaic populations. These ghost populations diverged from our ancestors roughly 500,000 to 1 million years ago. They left no known fossils. Only genetic traces. Who were they? Where did they live? What did they look like? Nobody knew. They existed only as statistical signals in the DNA of living people. But their contributions were real and measurable. Between 2 and 19% of certain African genomes may derive from these unknown sources. The recalculated clock also affected estimates for the out-of-Africa migration. The 60 to 70,000 year date remained broadly supported, but earlier dispersals now seemed more plausible. Modern humans, or near-modern populations, may have left Africa multiple times across a much longer time frame. Fossil evidence supported this possibility. Modern human teeth from Fayan Cave in southern China were dated to at least 80,000 years ago. A jawbone from Mislia Cave in Israel was dated to roughly 180,000 years ago. Early departures were not anomalies. They were part of the pattern. A pattern of movement and mixing and retreat that characterized human evolution not for thousands, but for hundreds of thousands of years. The simple arrow from Africa to the world was becoming a web of pathways crossing and recrossing through deep time. The recalculated molecular clock did not just change dates. It changed the entire conceptual framework. Human evolution was slower and deeper than anyone realized. Our species was not young. It was ancient. Its roots reached toward the million-year mark and possibly beyond. And here was the most unsettling question of all. If the divergence between our lineage and the Neanderthal Denisovan lineage happened close to 1 million years ago, then what was happening before that divergence? What did the common ancestor look like? Where did it live? The fossils from this period were rare and fragmented. The genetic evidence could not reach that far back directly. Protein analysis might extend the window slightly, but the deep past remained mostly dark. A vast stretch of human evolution shrouded in silence. What we knew was this. Somewhere around 1 million years ago, a population of humans began to fracture. One branch moved into Europe and became Neanderthals. Another spread across East Asia and became Denisovans. A third remained in Africa and eventually became us. But those three branches were not clean separations. They intertwined repeatedly. They exchanged genes across hundreds of thousands of years. They met and merged and separated again. The braided stream model was not a metaphor. It was the literal architecture of human evolution. The recalculated clock revealed one more disturbing possibility. The split leading to those African ghost populations may have been even older than the Neanderthal divergence, meaning that within Africa itself, there were lineages more distantly related to each other than we are to Neanderthals. Some of those lineages may have persisted until remarkably recently. Some may have been absorbed into expanding modern human populations within the last 100,000 years. Their genes flowing into our ancestors like tributaries entering a great river, invisible but permanent. The genetic clock had been recalibrated. The dates had shifted. The story had deepened beyond recognition. But the most important discovery was still ahead, because the evidence was now pointing towards something specific, something that no one had predicted. A trace in the genome, a signal older than any fossil. A ghost that was not from Africa at all. And when researchers finally isolated that signal, it would force a question that cut to the very heart of human identity. What does it actually mean to be Homo sapiens? The answer was about to become far more complicated than anyone was prepared for. Chapter 8. A deeper origin for modern humans. The ghost signal was not a glitch. It was not noise in the data. It was a message from the deep past, carried in the genomes of living people across sub-Saharan Africa, and it pointed to something extraordinary. Geneticists had found traces of an unknown archaic lineage. This lineage diverged from the ancestors of modern humans somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million years ago. No fossils have been matched to it, no skull, no jawbone. Nothing but code. The contribution was not trivial. In some African populations, the archaic signal accounted for as much as 19% of certain genomic regions. That is a staggering number. It means that a substantial portion of some people's DNA comes from a species we have never seen. This ghost population was not Neanderthal. It was not Denisovan. It was something else entirely. Something that lived and bred within Africa, while Neanderthals roamed Europe and Denisovans inhabited Asia. Something that shared the continent with our direct ancestors. And it interbred with them, repeatedly, over tens of thousands of years. The genetic evidence suggests not a single encounter, but ongoing contact. Two populations living side by side, sometimes merging, sometimes drifting apart. A long and intimate entanglement. The implications are profound. If a lineage diverged from ours close to 1 million years ago, then the roots of what we call modern humanity reach far deeper than 300,000 years. The features that define us did not appear all at once. They accumulated, gradually, across vast stretches of time, a mosaic assembled from many sources over hundreds of thousands of years. The modern human face at Jebel Irhoud, 300,000 years ago, sat atop an archaic braincase. The pieces came together slowly. This is the mosaic model of human evolution. It proposes that different modern traits evolved at different times in different populations across Africa. No single group possessed the full package. Instead, gene flow between groups slowly assembled the combination we recognize today. Chris Stringer of the Natural History Museum in London has been among the most prominent voices advocating this view. He argues that African multi-regionalism is the most accurate description of our origins. Not one garden, not one birthplace. A continent of gardens. Eleanor Scarry of the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History formalized this idea further. She proposed that African populations were separated by deserts, forests, and rivers into semi-isolated groups. Climate shifts periodically reconnected them, allowing genes and innovations to flow. During wet phases, the Sahara became green. Corridors opened between east and west, north and south. Populations that had been isolated for millennia suddenly encountered each other. They shared genes. They shared tools. Then the corridors closed again and isolation resumed. This cycle repeated over hundreds of thousands of years. Each reconnection brought new combinations. Each isolation allowed local adaptation to continue. The result was not a tree. It was a network. A web of exchanges pulsing across an entire continent. Now consider the timeline. If the ghost lineage diverged near 1 million years ago, and if it contributed substantially to modern African genomes, then the story of Homo sapiens cannot begin at 300,000 years. It must begin earlier, much earlier. The molecular clock supports this. Recalibrated estimates place the divergence between the Neanderthal lineage and the modern human lineage at roughly 800,000 years ago. The Denisovan split may be even older. These are not distant cousins. These are parallel branches from a deep trunk. And the ghost lineages within Africa may represent branches even more ancient than the Neanderthal split. If that is true, then some of the DNA inside living Africans today traces back to a divergence older than the one that produced Neanderthals. Pause on that. Some of the code in your cells, if you are of African descent, may come from a human species that separated from your main ancestral line before Neanderthals even existed. A species with no name, no face, only a whisper in the genome. This does not mean modern humans are 1 million years old in the traditional sense. No one is claiming that someone who looked exactly like us walked the earth 1 million years ago. But the lineage, the deep genetic river that became us, may well be that old. What changed is the definition of beginning. We once thought of origins as a point, a moment when the first modern human appeared. Now, the evidence suggests origins are a process. A long, slow convergence of traits and genes from multiple ancestral populations over immense timescales. The fossils support this reinterpretation. Across Africa, specimens from the Middle Pleistocene show a bewildering mix of modern and archaic features. No two sites tell the same story. Each population carried its own unique combination of old and new. At Herdo in Ethiopia, skulls dated to 160,000 years ago show near-modern anatomy with some archaic robustness. At Kabwe in Zambia, a skull perhaps 300,000 years old has a massive brow ridge but a face that hints at modernity. At Florisbad in South Africa, a partial skull around 260,000 years old combines features of several lineages. At Ngaloba in Tanzania, a skull roughly 120,000 years old shows yet another unique combination. No single site tells the whole story. These are not failed experiments. They are not dead ends. They are participants in the process, contributors to the slow assembly of what we would eventually call Homo sapiens. Each one carried genes that may still flow through living populations today. The deep origin of modern humans is not a single event. It is a continental phenomenon stretching across Africa and possibly beyond. It involves known species like Homo heidelbergensis and unknown ones like the ghost lineages. It spans from 1 million years ago to the present. And if the Harbin skull truly belongs to a sister lineage closer to us than Neanderthals, then even Eurasia played a role in this deep assembly. The network was not confined to one continent. The braided stream flowed across hemispheres. This is the new framework. Deep roots, multiple sources, a slow convergence, and the haunting possibility that we carry within us the genetic legacy of species we have never found and may never find. The dose signal is not an anomaly. It is the signature of our true origin. Chapter 9. A world of interconnected human populations. 1 million years ago, the world looked nothing like today. The continents were in the same positions, but the climate was radically different. Ice sheets advanced and retreated across the northern hemisphere in great cycles. Sea levels rose and fell by more than 100 meters. Africa was not a single uniform environment. It was a mosaic of ecosystems. Dense tropical forests covered the Congo Basin. The Sahara alternated between hyper-arid desert and lush green savanna. The East African Rift Valley created corridors and barriers simultaneously. In this fragmented landscape, human populations did not exist as one unified species. They existed as clusters, groups separated by geography and climate, each adapting to local conditions, each developing its own trajectory. Connected sometimes, isolated often. This is the world that produced us. In the East, populations adapted to open savannas and lake margins. Their tools reflected their environment. Long blades for cutting, points for hunting. Technologies suited to grasslands and the animals that lived there. In the South, different populations developed different strategies. The coastlines of southern Africa offered shellfish and marine resources. These groups may have been among the first to exploit the sea systematically. Their cognitive world was different. Their pressures were different. In the West, tropical forests presented unique challenges. Dense canopy limited visibility. Prey behaved differently. Plant resources dominated. The populations here were isolated by the vast Congo Basin, which acted as a genetic barrier for tens of thousands of years. In the north, the Sahara acted as a gate. When the climate was wet, it opened. Populations from sub-Saharan Africa moved northward and encountered groups in the Maghreb and the Levant. When the climate dried, the gate closed and isolation resumed. Each of these regions harbored its own evolving human population. They were not separate species in most cases. They were variations on a theme, but the variations mattered. Each group carried unique genetic adaptations. Each contributed something different to the eventual whole, and it was not only Africa. By 1 million years ago, Homo erectus had already spread across much of Eurasia. Populations existed in China, in Java, in the Caucasus. These were not modern humans, but they were part of the larger human story. The Dmanisi site in Georgia produced skulls dated to roughly 1.8 million years ago. These are among the earliest human fossils outside Africa. They show extraordinary variation. Some look almost like Homo habilis. Others approach Homo erectus. All come from one site and one time period. This variation at Dmanisi tells us something important. Even nearly 2 million years ago, human populations were diverse. The idea of a single type of human at any given time is an illusion created by a sparse fossil record. By 500,000 years ago, this diversity had only increased. In Europe, the lineage that would become Neanderthals was taking shape. In Asia, Denisovans were evolving their own adaptations. In Africa, multiple lineages including our own ancestors were diverging and reconnecting. The Cima de los Huesos site in Atapuerca, Spain, preserves 28 individuals from roughly 430,000 years ago. Their DNA links them to Neanderthals, but their anatomy shows features of Homo heidelbergensis. They are a population in transition. At Boxgrave in England, a tibia from roughly 500,000 years ago shows a powerful, heavily built individual. At Petrolona in Greece, a skull of similar age shows a unique combination of features. Europe alone hosted remarkable diversity 500,000 years ago. Asia was equally complex. The Denisovans, known primarily from DNA, occupied a range that stretched from Siberia to Southeast Asia. Their genome shows they interbred with modern humans, Neanderthals, and possibly even more archaic lineages. They were not isolated. In China, fossils from sites like Dali and Jinshan and Maba defy easy classification. They combine modern and archaic features in ways that do not fit neatly into any existing species category. Some researchers group them as late Homo heidelbergensis. Others see something new. The Harbin skull fits into this complex Asian picture. Its massive size and archaic brow ridge contrast with its relatively modern face and brain volume. Whether it is Homo longi or Denisovan or something else, it represents a population that was distinct yet connected. Connected to whom? That is the critical question. Gene flow did not require migration across continents in a single generation. It required only gradual movement. A few individuals joining a neighboring group. That group sharing genes with the next group over. Over thousands of years, genes could travel vast distances through this relay process. A beneficial mutation arising in southern Africa could eventually reach populations in North Africa, then the Levant, then deeper into Eurasia. Slowly, invisibly, but inexorably. This is how the braided stream worked. Not through grand migrations, though those happened too, but through the slow, continuous exchange of genetic material between neighboring groups. A network of populations, each node contributing to the larger flow. The Neanderthal DNA in non-African populations is direct evidence of this process. So is the Denisovan DNA in Melanesians and Tibetans. So are the ghost signals in African genomes. Interbreeding was not an exception. It was the rule. Denny, the hybrid child from Denisova cave, proves that interbreeding between different human species produced viable offspring. Her Neanderthal mother and Denisovan father came from lineages separated by roughly 400,000 years of evolution. Yet they produced a living child. If species separated by 400,000 years could interbreed successfully, then the boundaries between human populations were far more permeable than we imagined. The concept of species itself becomes blurred. These were not separate biological kinds. They were variations within a continuum. The world of 1 million years ago to 100,000 years ago was therefore not a world of isolated species evolving independently. It was a world of interconnected populations exchanging genes across continents and across what we would call species boundaries. This interconnection is what made us. Modern humans are not the product of a single population that outcompeted all others. We are the product of a network. A web of ancestors that includes Neanderthals, Denisovans, ghost lineages, and possibly species we have not yet discovered. Our genome is a palimpsest, a document written over and over by different hands across hundreds of thousands of years. Each layer contributed something. Each encounter, each interbreeding event, each slow exchange of genes added a new line to the text of who we are. The interconnected world of the Pleistocene was not a failure of speciation. It was the engine of our creation. The diversity, the contact, the blending of lineages across time and space produced a species of extraordinary genetic richness. That species is us, and we carry that entire history in every cell. Chapter 10. The mystery of our true beginning. So where does this leave us? We started with a simple question. How old are modern humans? The traditional answer was 200,000 to 300,000 years. The emerging answer is far more complicated and far more ancient. If the lineage that led to Homo sapiens diverged from the Neanderthal lineage roughly 800,000 years ago, then the genetic identity of our species has roots at least that deep. But roots are not the same as the tree. The tree itself, the full expression of anatomically modern humans, appeared gradually. No single fossil marks the moment of our species' birth. Jebel Irhoud, at 300,000 years, shows a modern face with an archaic brain case. Homo kibish, at 195,000 years, is more complete. But even Homo kibish does not represent the sudden appearance of our species. It represents one snapshot of an ongoing process. A process that began long before and continued long after. The assembly of modern human anatomy was gradual, mosaic, and geographically dispersed. The behavioral evidence follows the same pattern. Complex toolmaking appears at different times in different places. Symbolic behavior, like the use of ochre, appears in southern Africa over 100,000 years ago. But similar behaviors appear at different times elsewhere. There is no single behavioral revolution. No moment when humans suddenly became modern in their thinking. Instead, there is a slow accumulation of cognitive and cultural innovations across multiple populations over vast timescales. The genetic evidence tells the same story from a different angle. Modern human genetic diversity is deepest in Africa, as expected. But it does not trace back to a single ancestral population. It traces back to multiple populations that were semi-isolated for long periods before merging. The Khoisan peoples of southern Africa carry genetic lineages that diverged from other modern human lineages roughly 300,000 years ago. The Mbuti and other Central African forest groups show similarly deep divergences. These are not recent separations. They are ancient. And beneath these deep African divergences lie the ghost signals, lineages that contributed to modern genomes but diverged from us 500,000 to 1 million years ago. These are the deepest layers, the oldest voices in our genetic chorus. If we define Homo sapiens by anatomy, then our species is roughly 300,000 years old. If we define it by genetics, the answer depends on which genes we examine. Some of our genomic lineages are far older than 300,000 years. If we define our species by behavior, the boundaries blur even further. Neanderthals buried their dead. They made art. They used complex tools. If behavior defines humanity, then humanity has multiple origins in multiple species across multiple continents. This is the central revelation. There is no single moment when modern humans began. There is no garden, no cradle, no first couple. There is only a process. A vast, slow, continent-spanning process of convergence and divergence and convergence again. The question is not when did modern humans appear. The question is, when did the process begin? And the answer, based on current evidence, points toward roughly 1 million years ago. That is when the major lineages that would eventually contribute to our genome began to diverge. That is when the braided stream began to flow. From that point, multiple populations across Africa and eventually Eurasia evolved along parallel and intersecting paths. Some became Neanderthals. Some became Denisovans. Some became the ghost lineages. And some became the main trunk of what we call Homo sapiens. But the trunk was never pure. It was fed by tributaries from all the other streams. Neanderthal genes improved our immune systems. Denisovan genes helped us breathe at high altitudes. Ghost lineage genes contributed benefits we have not yet identified. We are the sum of all these contributions. The Harbin skull stands as a symbol of this complexity. It may represent a close sister species. It may be Denisovan. It may belong to a lineage we have not yet named. Until DNA is extracted, its exact place in the family network remains uncertain. But its existence proves that the Middle Pleistocene was not a void. It was a crucible, a time when multiple human species coexisted, interacted, and interbred. A time when the raw materials of modern humanity were being forged in the fires of evolution and exchange. The fossils from China, from Daly and Jinyashan and Wollongdong and Maba, tell the same story from the Asian side. Populations with unique combinations of features. Populations that do not fit neatly into the European-African framework that dominated paleoanthropology for a century. The old model was simple. Humans evolved in East Africa, developed modern anatomy, migrated out, and replaced everyone else. That model is dead. What replaced it is messier, more complex, and more beautiful. The new model says we evolved everywhere. Not independently, but interconnectedly. Through gene flow and migration and interbreeding and isolation and reconnection. Through 1 million years of contact between populations that we would classify as different species, but that nature did not keep apart. This is the answer to the question posed at the beginning. Modern humans are not 300,000 years old. The process that created modern humans is roughly 1 million years old. We are the current expression of a story that stretches back to the early Pleistocene. And the story is not over. We are still evolving, still accumulating mutations, still being shaped by the genetic legacies of Neanderthals and Denisovans and ghost populations whose names we will never know. The braided stream has not stopped flowing. We are just the latest ripple. Uptoast, with this ripple. New fossils will be found. DNA will be extracted from specimens previously considered too old or too degraded. Protein analysis will reveal relationships invisible to anatomy. Sediment DNA will identify species that were present at sites where no bone survived. Each discovery will add a new thread to the braid. Each will complicate the story further. Each will make the old categories less useful and the new understanding more rich. The mystery of our true beginning is not a problem to be solved. It is a process to be witnessed. And the deepest truth may be the simplest. We were never alone. At no point in our history did a single human species walk the earth unchallenged and unaccompanied. We always shared the world with others. And those others are still with us, written in our DNA. The beginning of modern humans is not a date. It is a river, and the river is 1 million years long. Stand still for a moment. Consider the weight of what the evidence now suggests. You are not the product of a single origin. You are the living archive of 1 million years of encounters between human species that no longer exist. Their memories persist in your cells. Every breath you take at altitude may owe something to a Denisovan ancestor on a Tibetan plateau. Every immune response you mount may carry the refinement of a Neanderthal survivor in Ice Age Europe. Every unknown adaptation may trace to a ghost who left no bones. Only code. We set out to answer a simple question. How old are modern humans? The answer is that the question itself was wrong. There is no single age. There is no birthday for a species assembled from 1 million years of convergence across continents and lineages. The Harbin skull still guards its secrets. No DNA extracted. No definitive classification. It sits in a museum in Hebei province, a massive archaic face staring across 150,000 years of silence. It may be our closest known relative. We do not yet know. What we know is this. The human story is older, wider, and stranger than anyone imagined a generation ago. It is a story of connection, not isolation, of braiding, not branching, of a species that was never truly singular and a beginning that was never truly a beginning. Somewhere in Africa or Asia, in sediment not yet sampled, in a cave not yet entered, in a genome not yet sequenced, the next chapter of this story is waiting. It will not simplify things. It will make them more wondrous. That is the nature of deep time. You carry 1,000,000 years of humanity within you. Every ancestor, known and unknown, named and nameless, fossil and ghost, they all converge in you. The river continues. If this journey into deep time moved you, subscribe to our channel and join us as we explore more of these profound mysteries. The story of who we are is still being written, and the most extraordinary chapters may lie just ahead.